This is Steven Diego, and you are tuned in to Breaking Down the Breakdown. On today's episode, we are going to explore the wonderful and terrible world of anxious attachment styles. Hello, everyone. It is time for another episode. It is time. I am very inconsistent with these, but let me tell you something right now. At least I did it in the same month. There's no more 5-month wait for the next episode. This is Breaking Down the Breakdown. This is me, Steven Diego. I hope you guys have been well these past few weeks that I have not been able to do something. You know, sometimes life takes a turn and then you realize, wait a minute, am I making excuses? Am I actually making excuses why I'm not doing this? Some days I feel like a hypocrite. But then I kind of realize this is exactly why I do the show. This is exactly why I do this podcast. So I shouldn't give myself a hard time over that. You know, every time I go through something in my life, I feel like, wow, why am I running a mental health podcast when I'm barely keeping it together? Well, that's exactly why I started this in the first place. You know what? It's nice to be reminded of that. But today, oh my goodness. Today's episode might really trigger a lot of you, so I might even trigger myself. This is me coming clean with myself. You know, this is me just being able to finally put this out there. I don't know if I've actually ever talked about this on my podcast before. Maybe somebody else came on and talked about this, but I'm a terrible host. All right, but today I do have a question for everybody that's listening or watching this right now. Have you ever been in a situation with relationships where it never works out? And by it never works out, I mean everything is great and then all of a sudden it's just not so great, and then all of a sudden it is terrible, and you can't help but feel like you're just not meeting the right people. You can't help but feel like the people you end up with is the problem. So you start kind of blaming yourself for not having, a really good sense of judgment, or maybe you just attract the wrong people. And how many cycles does that take for you to realize maybe you are the problem? Now, I will say this. After I had gone and seen a therapist, and who I'm still seeing at this time, that's when I actually started to realize that a lot of my relationships in the past, not just with friends, right, with actual relationships, they have failed. Not because the people were assholes, not because the people were terrible people, but because I paint them out to be terrible people in my head. And I had to ask myself why I did that. It's funny because I've always been the type to admit when I've done something wrong. But for some reason, I feel like I'm so good at lying to myself, or I'm so good at being so delusional as to what the problem is, that I actually failed to realize that I might actually be the biggest red flag or the biggest issue in any relationship I've been in. So it was important for me to talk about anxious attachment styles today. I can't do a deep dive in this episode, so we're going to probably do a few episodes of this, because I am capping my episodes at 30 minutes, so that's easier for people to actually listen to. But for a lot of us, we grew up without any knowledge of mental health disorders or any knowledge of, cognitive, whatchamacallit. It's at the tip of my tongue. I'm gonna have to type on Google. There you go. Cognitive distortions. I love how I had to Google this. A lot of us did not realize what cognitive distortions were. And especially worse if you came from, and I would say this, a third world country like I did, in which superstitions and religion is actually what really governs the entire nation. I mean, yes, there's science involved, but living in smaller pockets within the cities, some of these places, like we actually, well, I still do. I believe in spirits. That's just me. Don't worry. I'm not going to force that into people. But this is what I grew up on. So not once, whenever anybody would have a panic attack or people would start to feel weird, the last thing they think of is it's a mental health disorder, or you are truly leaning into your cognitive distortions at the moment. It is not that. You're either possessed, didn't pray enough, somebody out there is doing some voodoo or witchcraft on you and your family. Like, these are actually the go-to solutions, or not solutions, but the go-to answers for people who are experiencing these things. So you can only imagine for people like me who grew up like this, we never actually was able to get our heads around what the fuck is wrong with us. And so I decided I'm going to speak about it today because, as you may know, like, I'm very open about these things, and I don't want to say I'm worried, but I'm sitting here and I'm realizing how many people out there probably don't realize that they need to start looking inwards. Because for a lot of people, when I say look inwards, so many times we speak with our friends and families or whoever it is that we talk to whenever relationships fail or ends or whatever it is. And it's almost offensive. It feels almost offensive when they say, you just gotta work on yourself. Because what the fuck does that even mean, right? Like, let me give an example. When my relationship failed, and even I said, okay, I just need to work on myself. Saying that you need to work on yourself without actually figuring out what you need to work on, pretty much what you're telling yourself is that you're a problem. And yes, you could be the problem. Like, I have to admit, I was the problem, right? But I'm not... My point is, I was going to say, I'm not the only one, but that's not the point, right? Like, any other problems that affected the relationships, I can't control if it's not anything to do with me, right? Only I can control what is happening within me. So that's very important, first of all, to think about. Now, second of all, it's almost like you're manifesting it, right? Because sometimes all it takes is a really good intrusive thought to kind of derail your little, I was going to say spot treatment, but what is wrong with me today? To derail your progress when it comes to doing some self-help or some some work on yourself, right? It's all it takes is for your intrusive thought to say, now hold on. Why am I the problem all the time? I'm just not enough. I guess I'm just not worth it. And then you're going to open up all of these doors to problems you probably don't even have. But because you want to attach the situation at hand to something that you could easily understand, even though it's not happening to you. Ta-da! You have now created a problem that was never there and has solved it. But congratulations, you solved it. But that wasn't your problem in the first place. So you go on to the next relationship, and bam, the same thing happens. This kind of situation is actually very common for people with anxious attachment styles. For a lot of you probably don't know what anxious attachment styles entail. So personally, I will say this, right? These are a few things that I go through with my anxious attachment styles, right? Like, I have fear of abandonment. It's hard for me to set boundaries because I feel like the moment I set boundaries up, or set up, I don't say a wall, right? But like the moment I set boundaries and I'm like, okay, this and that and this and that, the person I'm dealing with, whether friends or, family or relationship, they're going to start to think negatively of me. So majority of the time, these boundaries actually only pop up when I stop talking to everybody, which is so unhealthy. Oftentimes I feel like I'm not worthy of being loved. Oftentimes I am too codependent. Like, I'm not even going to lie to you. Like, sometimes when I'm in a relationship, I feel like if my partner doesn't say or react to anything I'm doing outside of us, I can't do it. I still do it, don't get me wrong, but there are some people who, it's almost as if they're asking for permission, right? Even though they don't need it. Another thing for me that's really big, though, is I would have to say my fear of abandonment. And the thing is this, right? For a lot of people who have anxious attachment styles and they don't realize where they got it from, a lot of it happens when you were a kid. My mom left me with my grandparents. My grandparents raised me. My grandparents were my real parents at that time, but they also left me. Well, my grandma left me, right? So sure, like I wasn't fully left behind because my grandpa was still there, but it's the act of being abandoned. Like as a child growing up, you don't understand. You're too young to understand why people have to go do things. You start to kind of develop these feelings of my mom or my dad or my grandma or whoever it is leaving me because they don't want to be with me anymore. I don't make them happy. Unfortunately, this is like a seed that is buried within your mind, within your psyche, in your whole personality. And when it starts to blossom, I love how I'm talking about this blossom like it's a beautiful thing. But unfortunately, when it blossoms, it's when you finally have relationships outside of where this happened in the first place. And it'll start taking root within, everything that you're doing. It'll start attaching itself to everything in your life. And without you being able to recognize that, it could be the very thing that destroys your relationships, whether it's friendships or your romantic relationships. That's what happened to me, right? High school is not a great time. I don't like to talk about high school. Like people who knew me in high school knew the kind of crazy I was, right? And I say that because I recognize some of those things. I recognize that there would be days where I just want attention from everyone, where I was so depressed. I felt so lonely, even though I had so many friends, because one person that I wanted to catch the attention of didn't give me any attention that day. And it made zero sense. But that's a story for another time. But my point is, if you are experiencing these kinds of emotions within a relationship where you feel like your partner is just not giving you enough. And I don't mean they're actually not giving you enough, because there are signs. It's when you start to feel like, hold on, my partner does A, B, C, D, F without me asking them. But because my partner didn't do G and went straight to H to Z, I don't think they're giving me enough. If I phrase it that way, is it still fair to say that, oh, well, maybe you should leave them because you know what, you're too good for them? And I'm only saying this because I've experienced the same thing, right? My poor ex, wherever you are, I hope you're doing well. I really do. Like the people in my past have been great to me, and I have nothing bad to say about them. At least not anymore. Now that I've finally gone to therapy and realized I was a problem. But, my ex gave me everything I could have ever asked for and more. They went above and beyond. It was outside of their personality. They stepped out of their comfort zone for me. And I remember a conversation I had with them where I said, you're not even giving me close to 100% of what you can give me compared to what I give you. Now imagine how much that hurts when you are somebody who don't normally do these things and you have managed to step out of your comfort zone to do everything you can to try to make somebody else happy, and they have the audacity to say to you, you're actually not doing enough because I know other people who would do X, Y, and Z for me. And this is back when I didn't know what the fuck love languages were too, right? And then you fast forward that into the relationship ending, and then you fast forward that into the whole phase of, here I am about to talk shit about my relationship because, I got broken up with, but they were just, they never made me happy, da da da. Like, it is so unfair. It is one thing to hurt yourself. Like, that's already bad. Like, you should never do that. But when you start to hurt others as a result of you not being able to recognize your own flaws and your own issues and your own irregularities when it comes to certain things within yourself, that's a problem. This is something that you can actually end up carrying until you're way fucking old. And believe me, I know of a few people who are in their 60s who still believe that the world owes them everything and more. And I'm not saying that the world doesn't owe you everything and more. It's not about that. The problem is, all they want to do is take. They feel entitled to take everything. But not once have they shown to give these things back to others. And it's hard to blame them after knowing what their childhood was like and what they grew up with and how their relationships were, because that was all they knew. And to try to have a conversation with them about these things, at that point, it's kind of like, well, shit. Like, are they even going to listen, right? It's worth a shot, but this is why I'm talking about this today. Because there are a lot of people out there who don't understand attachment styles. They try to read and they're just kind of like, oh, haha, yeah, this is me. Much like with OCD, like it kind of ticks me off when some people go, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so OCD. Like, I just like to, make sure that this is folded. And I ask, what happens if it's not folded? And they're like, oh, well, then I just have to fold it. I'm like, okay, well, what happens if it's not folded? What happens in your brain? Like, how do you feel? They're like, I'll just do it tomorrow. That's not OCD. It's kind of the same thing, right? So this is why I wanted to talk about this, because maybe somebody out there, maybe one of you people are experiencing the same things, and you're experiencing within your relationships or relationships you had in the past that you always seem to be the good guy, and you only ever date assholes. Ask yourself this. And this is going to be the triggering part of this. Have you ever had an argument with a partner where your arguments were completely made up in your head? Because you because you felt like an intuition, like a premonition, like OMG, my spidey senses are tingling. They're cheating. They're talking to somebody else. And you end up fooling yourself into believing that. And because they can't explain it, because it came out of nowhere, right? Because they can't explain it, you start to have a meltdown because you think they're cheating on you. Or better yet, they have a perfect explanation for X, Y, and Z. And instead of being able to believe them, you sit there and say, they're so fucking good at lying and hiding things from me. Now I want the password for everything. Now I want to know where you are at all times because I can't trust you. And sometimes this goes a few different ways, but one of the many ways this goes is either the partner does give the password and their pins at all times, or they break up. Because what is a relationship without trust? And in both times, first of all, when you finally have access to their personal lives, to everything they have, and you don't find anything, you keep digging, and you can't find anything. And you're convinced that there may be another device, there may be another email, there may be another this, another that. You're never satisfied. You want to believe that they are doing you wrong even though they're not. Because your intrusive thoughts are telling you that you're right, you're onto something because of this one incident that happened. And on the flip side of it, when they decide to break up with you because they don't want to be in a toxic relationship, they don't want to be, persecuted for things they never did, you end up saying, I fucking knew it. You're a fucking liar. You're a cheater. Don't fucking talk to me ever again. I can't believe this. I always end up with people like you. This is what I'm alluding to, because this actually always happens to people who have anxious attachment styles. But not just that, also with a very traumatic experience growing up, like I did. But we cannot keep on using that as an excuse. I'm going to go and say this. Maybe the partner you have is not the right one for you. Maybe they haven't done anything wrong, right? And you still feel this way. I'm not saying it's entirely a you thing. But you do need to find a partner who is supportive of what you're going through and wants to learn it with you and wants to understand you better. And you have to allow them to do that for you, because this is not a joke, right? And everybody has different attachment styles. There's disorganized, there's the secure one, which we all aspire to be, but not all of us are lucky to be there. But it's always very interesting for me when people don't want to see a therapist because they see it as a sign of weakness. What do you guys think happened in therapy? It's just a space that allows you to actually explore what you are going through with no judgment whatsoever. And I will say this though, right? You have to find a good therapist and you're able to do that. And it does take many tries sometimes, but you cannot give up. Sometimes they just, the therapists you find are just not specialized in what you have. Recognize that and move on. I love how I'm bouncing back and forth here. Only because I'm convinced that after you actually hear this, that after you guys watch this or listen to this, you're going to realize, shit, maybe I was wrong all this time. I mean, you could be, you could not be. I don't know where you'll be. I just hope that after you hear this, if you recognize some of the signs I was talking about, if you've exhibited behavior that I was talking about earlier, I've done that, right? Am I ashamed to say that? Of course I am. But not because, oh God, this is so embarrassing. No, it's not like that. Because I'm ashamed because I actually put people through the ringer. I put a few people in my life through hell. I put some of my best friends through this, by the way. And they're still here with me. I love them. I can't believe they're still friends with me. But this is why, for me, when relationships fail now or end, I'm able to kind of recognize what it is that may have gone wrong or what it is that may not have worked out. I don't want to say necessarily gone wrong, right? Sometimes it's wrong time, right person. Sometimes it's, again, maybe kind of the same thing. Like, I got to work on myself. They need to work on themselves. Sometimes it really is just, so incompatible because nothing in common. But for people with anxious attachments, this is very hard to understand because we want to just hold on. We are so afraid of losing someone because we end up placing our value onto the whole situation, that if we let someone go or someone lets us go, we are reduced to nothing. And that is so unhealthy because that is so not true. But how are you going to convince yourself of that, right? If you don't even know exactly what you're going through. It's so fun. See, I'm glad I said this was like how many parts am I going to have in this? Because we only have 6 minutes left in this. But I'm going to try to find guests who, admittedly have anxious attachment styles and see how they deal with it. Because I want this conversation to be open to everybody, right? There are going to be people who disagree. That's totally fine. That's cool. This is why I'm putting my life on the line here. Like I make it seem like it's life or death. But this is why I'm putting my privacy out on the line here. Because as somebody who has anxious attachment style, I have exhibited some of these behaviors. And it does come from me being abandoned. That is the main thing for me. Like I'm so scared of being separated from people I formed bonds with because of what happened to me when I was a kid. But that's another thing that I kind of want to point out. Do we know, or do we realize sometimes why it never feels like it's enough? Whatever our partner does, it never feels like it's enough. It's because we are looking to fill the void that, I guess for me, that my parents had left me, right? There's that void within my heart, within myself, within my soul that will never be filled. And I never recognized that. I never realized that. But now knowing it puts it into a perspective of any time I feel like my partner's this and that and this and that, that's actually not their fault. Am I asking for too much at that point? I had to kind of take a step back a few times because I have to be like, whoa, that seems unreasonable. And you'll have friends, and I love friends like this. Who are like, no, you deserve the world, bestie. Go get it, bitch. Like like we have friends like that. And I say cherish them, but also allow them to understand. When are they supposed to cheer us on? And when are they supposed to say, hey, let's take a step back because this seems a little unfair. Not just to them, but to you. Because if you're going to set up expectations for people, for your partners, expectations that they can never, ever achieve because they are not your parents who left you when you were 2, how the fuck are you going to move forward in the relationship? It's a very touchy subject, and I recognize that. And I know some of the things I said might be so triggering to some people. Again, with no offer of solution at the end of the episode. But just like episodes in the past, I'm opening this up because I want people to actually ask themselves the right questions. Am I going through this because I am so bad at picking my partners? Am I going through this because I'm not worthy of being loved because I'm not enough? Or am I going through this because I have unresolved issues? I can bet you like $98 it's the last part. Because you will always be enough. And yes, some of us have questionable taste in people. But sometimes, that's not even the issue. Sometimes you're just like, oh my God, that's your type. And they end up being treated like kings and queens. Like it was fantastic. But that's also another thing. There are some people who end up picking people who will always hurt them because that's all they know. But that's a conversation for another time. That's not necessarily an anxious attachment problem. That's more of it's a trauma problem, right? It's always, what is that saying? Better the devil you know kind of situation. Because you've grown, I don't want to say comfortable, but you're used to that kind of pain. That you kind of know how to deal with it. You know how to get over it. Only for you to do it again and again. Very unhealthy. But that's a conversation for another time. But if you guys feel like you've been affected by this podcast and you want to talk about your experiences, I have a new email address. It is now breakingdownthebreakdown at outlook.com. Isn't that great? We have our very own email now. I also set up a new Instagram page for this. I haven't done anything to it yet, so I'm not going to announce it just yet. But, just keep me in your socials. For now, go to Steven Diego Music. Talk to me there. But if you guys want to connect, talk about other things, not even just with the anxious attachment, but with other things, please feel free. And always remember, be compassionate, be kind. You never know what another person's going through. And I'm not just saying this towards other people, but be kind to yourself. That's something I did not exhibit this last 2 weeks because it's just been hitting the fan for me. I disappeared. Some people probably thought I died. I kind of did a little inside. And I'm just slowly picking myself back up now. But this was very important for me to talk about today. Because what I'm going through is kind of, it's kind of a similar situation. But so rude. This camera, I tell you, it just does not like me. Sorry, where was I? Yes, I was saying my goodbyes. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. I gotta do something about this. This is crazy. This is like the second time now. It's cut off in the middle and it looks so funny. But thank you so much for being here. Again, this is breaking down the breakdown. Really, I had to restart something just to record for like a minute. But bye guys, I'll see you guys soon. I might be able to upload part 2 this week. We'll never know, I'll try to see you guys. But anyways, love y'all. I'll see you later. Goodbye.